fa l'americano, americano, americano. Ma si nati in Italia, sienta a me non c'è sta niente a fa. Tu fa l'American, tu fa l'American, tu fa l'American, tu fa l'American.
Hello, welcome to Italics, the Italian American magazine. I'm your host, Anthony Tamburri. If it's October, it's Italian Heritage and Culture Month throughout the greater tri-state area and all around the country. As we broadcast this episode, the month's myriad events have almost transpired, although some actually go on through mid-November. Later in the year, we'll present an hour-long special of Italics, compiling all of the official events of the month into one program. For this edition of Italics, we'll take you to the National Organization of Italian American Women's annual luncheon, where they celebrated the Honorable Geraldine Ferraro on the 25th anniversary of her nomination as the first female and first Italian American candidate for vice president. Mario Cuomo, former governor of the state of New York, was keynote speaker. Now, please join me as we go to the Waldorf Astoria and celebrate the career of Geraldine Ferraro. Welcome, Honorable Geraldine Ferraro, to Italics TV.
I'm delighted that we have an opportunity to chat.
Here you are, we're at the NOIAW luncheon. You're being honored for who you are as an Italian American woman, and also we're celebrating 25 years of a historic, barrier-breaking nomination that was both gender and ethnic.
Absolutely. People do focus on the fact that I was the first woman. The most difficult part of that campaign was being the first Italian American. And an evening as we were traveling around the country, you know, I'd end up with these huge crowds there because I was a woman, and they'd be screaming, "Jerry, Jerry, Jerry." And then as soon as I got back to the hotel room and saw the press that came out, especially out of New York, that was stereotyping me and my husband and my father had been dead since I was 8 years old, and we're going after my father. It was mind-boggling. So, you know, the highs were the gender, the lows were being the ethnic.
Let me ask you about that, because I'm assuming you had some support from the Italian American community, and do you think it was along party lines, Democrat, Republican, or do you think it was more ethnic? That's obviously the theme for a book to write.
I have to tell you that when you take a look at where Italian Americans are in our community, in 1980, when NOIAW was first founded.
And you were one of the founders?
Right. Well, Aileen, Aileen was sitting in the audience, but people who were participating in this panel were John Markey from Staten Island, who was a Republican, Surf Maltese, who was a conservative, Mario Cuomo, who was really liberal, Democrat, and Geraldine Ferraro. I represented a conservative district, so I was a conservative Democrat. We were all over the political spectrum. So when I ran in 1984, you know, would I have loved John Markey's and Surf Maltese's support? Absolutely. But, you know, could they come out and support me simply because I was an Italian? No. And I found that throughout the campaign. The Republicans and Italians, especially in New York, most of them are a good majority of them here in New York, were Republicans. Yeah. But in addition to that, I would get letters from people all over the country. I remember getting a letter from one woman who wrote me and said, you know, we admire what you've done, when I would speak up and say, stop stereotyping. Yeah. And what she said was, but that's not good for us. Some of us don't want that to be done. We stay and we put up with it and we're quiet. After the 84 campaign was over, I was invited by Bill Fugazi. You know, nobody came out and defended me. Richard Reeves wrote an article and said if she were a male, they would have been out there. So, you know, is it gender? Is it culture? I don't know. I mean, it was a combination of things. It was, yes, you know, they had been all over the political spectrum. And no, you know, they did not support me because of that. Yeah. But then at the same point, if I were male, would they have supported me? Right. You know, differently. Yeah. If I see something that's wrong, I want to correct it
Yeah.
for the next person. And the next person is not going to put up with that. I mean, as long as I'm still alive, I'll be there yelling and screaming and saying, where
Good.
are you? How are you allowing this to happen? And in my remarks, you're going to hear some of this stuff
Good.
on exactly what happened during the course of that campaign as far as being Italian American, which again I say was the toughest part of that campaign.
Our honoree Geraldine Ferraro was an inspiration as she encouraged me to start this organization nearly 30 years ago. And she's been with us ever since. No one else of our generation has done more for Italian American women than Geraldine Ferraro. And perhaps no public figure has had more difficulty because of her Italian background. I remember when journalist Sam Donaldson said on the Oprah Winfrey Show that an investigative reporter would have to look for organized crime connections in any Italian American candidate for a high office. That was in 1984, and hopefully that nonsense is gone forever.
Matilda and I have known Geraldine and John for, I guess, 40 years or so. And I know what the rest of her life was like before she went into politics. She didn't need politics. John is a terrific guy and a great husband, incidentally. But John could have taken care of all of Geraldine's problems as a mother and a wife, etc. He was providing very nicely, thank you, for the family. Without her, she could have simply said, I'm going to stay home. And I know because I was in their house and I was a lawyer. And as a matter of fact, she was a client, one of many in a group that I was representing. And so I knew that, boy, she was living well and comfortably, etc. What else do you need? You have beautiful kids, a great husband. You're doing well, you're beautiful. She's still a very beautiful woman, and she always was. She was beautiful. And there's something way down deep in her that said, well, no, it really isn't enough. She was an activist in the community in Forest Hills, and she didn't like this unfairness or that unfairness. But she finally said, well, what the heck? You know, I'm a lawyer, and I'm going to do more with my... So she went to the DA's office and became a DA and became a stellar district attorney. She didn't need to do that. You don't get a lot of money being in the DA's office. But she took it. Why? Because she wanted to make a contribution. And then after that, if she ran for office, she became a congresswoman. And she proved she could do it better than a lot of the guys. And that's why when in 1984 there came this miracle of an opportunity. It was an opportunity for the Democrats and for the United States of America. But it was an opportunity only because you had Geraldine Ferraro there. It's not that someone whispered to the political gods, this is the year for a woman. It wasn't like that. When they were looking, I know because I discussed it with Mondale and the other people, and I was just one of those Democrats that was, you know, part of the discussion, but only part of the discussion. And it wasn't a question of, well, this is the time for a woman, now let's see if we have one. That's not the way it happened. The way it happened is, hey, there's that Geraldine Ferraro who happens to be a woman. We could make her the vice president. The first time in history, she'll be terrific. And she was terrific. And she is terrific. And she's more, and one thing she hasn't been called yet, and I'm going to call her this. She is courageous. She is a courageous woman. She always has been, and she always is.
Thank you very much, everybody. Please. I will tell you the truth, and that is that, thank God, the good news is the cancer is under control. Thank God. But this has been a bit of a setback, so the bad news is that I will not be on Dancing with the Stars, okay? And I will be. I will be out of this wheelchair by next week. It's driving me nuts. Plus, my husband of 49 years is now pushing me up and down, and I don't like being pushed around by anybody. Honestly, about you. You know, it is 25 years, and I get such a kick out of people who remember and those who don't have a clue about the '84 campaign. So I want to speak to a CEO. If I call myself, I usually get through. If if the voice that answers the phone is a woman in their late 30s or 40s or 50s, I get, is this the Geraldine Ferraro? And I say, yes, it is. And Zuma, whether or not that CEO wants to speak to me, they're speaking to me that day. But it is more fun to call, and you can tell the voices. If you get a voice that's in their 20s, I love it. I get. Could you spell that? And so I do. It's G-E-R, and I go through the whole thing. I was thinking about what I would say today as we celebrate the 25th anniversary of my nomination by the Democratic Party for Vice President of the United States. What people focus on, of course, is that I was the first woman nominated by a national party to that office, and until last November, the only woman. I cannot tell you how honored I am that Fritz Mondale chose me to join his ticket. Since 1984, women stop me on the streets, in airports, they come up to me in restaurants, and they all say the same thing. Thank you, that I made a difference in their lives. I'm not quite sure if it was I who made the difference, or if it was the candidacy that made the difference. They frequently start a conversation with, I figured if you could do it, I could do it too. And I hear about their going to college, I hear about their taking control of their lives, I hear about their running for office, they're asking for a raise. Only one woman shook me up a little bit when she stopped me and told me I finally got the courage to ask for a divorce. I didn't want to feel responsible for that, but I looked at the fact that maybe she should have asked for it before. God knows what was going on in our house before that. My mother and I had frequently talked about what it was like when she was a little girl, growing up in the early days of the 20th century. My mother was born in New York City in 1905. Her father came here in 1885. Her mother, when she was 15, arrived from a different mountain town near Salerno in 1888. Both my grandfather and my grandmother, my maternal grandparents, were illiterate, and they were dirt poor. My mother's earliest recollections were of living in an apartment in Italian Harlem, with a bathroom in the hall, the fourth youngest of 9 children. My grandfather was a street cleaner for the city of New York who got fired on a complaint of a woman who had thrown her garbage out of the window just as he finished cleaning the street beneath the window. He had shouted up and heard in his Italian dialect, spoke no English, and she yelled back, "I'll get you fired, wop." And so she did. Italians were treated badly by the Irish and by the Germans who came before them, and yes, even by the Catholic Church. And so Italians kept to themselves in little Italy's throughout the country. They put up with the stereotyping, they put up with discrimination. The children changed their names from Antonietta to Anne, Pasqualina to Pat, Michelangelo to Mike, Giovanni to John. Now you know all my aunts and uncles' names. When they went to school. And they spoke only English outside the home since they wanted to be like all the other kids. They were ashamed of being Italian. In some ways, many of these immigrants let either lack of knowledge about how to get help that was available, or pride, keep them from taking advantage of what New York City was offering its citizens at the time, which was both a public school education and, for those who qualified at the poverty level, home relief. My grandmother, when my grandfather subsequently had a stroke, took advantage of neither. She sent her children to work rather than to school so that she didn't have to take home relief, which was what welfare was called back then. The community, though poor, helped each other. They were patriotic. They became citizens as soon as they could, and they showed they were good Americans, sending their older kids off to fight in World War I and their younger sons and grandsons to fight and die in World War II. Between wars, many of the males worked construction, as did Mario's dad. In fact, I've been told that some of my relatives worked on the Midtown Tunnel. And the girls, including my mother, were sent as young teenagers to work in the sweatshops of the Garden Center. My father died suddenly when I was 8. My mother was 39 with 2 kids to raise. Money my father had left her in Italy could not be repatriated after the war. Like most women in the 40s, all of the family finances were handled by my father, and a large home and 2 family businesses kind of disappeared with the help of who knows? Lawyers, brokers, government. All I know is that in a year we moved from a large house in Newburgh to a small railroad apartment in the South Bronx, and my mother was back working in a factory as a crochet beater, a skill she had learned to help support younger brothers and sisters when her father had his stroke. My mother never complained, but no one could tell her that her children could not get an education because they had no father. So she worked, and she demanded that we work. She knew an education was our only ticket out of the South Bronx, and she was the only one, I have to tell you, on Election Day in 1984, who believed that my education would eventually lead me inside the door of the White House. I focus on my mother today because this event is about raising money for scholarships for young Italian American women. It is about giving our recipients a key to a future that can't be gotten any other way. It's what the GI Bill did for many Italian American kids coming home after World War II, so that they could move away from the tenements and become doctors and lawyers. It's something that took a little bit longer for us as an ethnic group to figure out, but we did. You women who are members of NOIAW are, I'm sure, as grateful as I am that your mothers got it when we were young. My maternal grandparents didn't get it. It wasn't their fault. They expected little. Society helped them little. Though my mother had only an 8th grade education, she was smart as hell. She read everything on sight, and she kept on top of me on all of the issues, especially when I was in Congress. But except for the hard work of my mother, I wouldn't have my education. I remember when I was graduating from high school, she was talking to my grandmother about sending me to college. I was all of 16 years old. And my Uncle Tom, who was born in Italy, said to her, "Why, Antonetta, why bother? She's pretty. She'll get married." Well, I was, and I did. But my mother responded, "You know, you're right, Tom. You educate a boy, you educate a boy alone. If you educate a girl, you educate a family." I didn't come with any of these views because I am a feminist. In fact, more than once people have commented that I was ahead of my time as a feminist when I kept my maiden name professionally 50 years ago. That's just not true. My life's views were shaped by my upbringing as an Italian American. My values are derived from that culture. Feminism wasn't an answer for me or an issue for me in 1960. I was newly married to a rather conservative Italian American man. And so when I said to John as I was filling out my papers for admission to the New York State Bar, "How would you feel if I kept my maiden name professionally, since my mother gave me my education?" John was secure enough to say, "If that will make you happy, do it." On graduation day, I handed from Fordham Law School, I handed my mother my diploma and said, "It belongs to both of us." We Italian Americans have come a long way in the past 100 years. I have one foot planted firmly in the past, which I don't want any of us to forget, as well as one planted firmly in the present to take advantage of what more there can be to accomplish. We are an ethnic group that has achieved. And we did it in a way that without a Civil Rights Act. We did it without non-discrimination laws, without any sort of affirmative action. We have put up with stereotypes, many of which floored me in the '84 campaign, and some of which still persist for people with vowels at the end of the names. And we put up with name calling. Despite it all, we have been successful. Take a look at the number of CEOs who share our heritage: the scientists, the lawyers, the academics, the actors, a former governor of New York, mayors, the House Speaker, 2 Supreme Court justices, neither of whom I agree with, the head of the CIA, would you believe, and 1 Italian-American woman who was nominated for national office 25 years ago. It took us maybe 2 generations more than any other ethnic group, but we were able to accomplish the things we did only because we do stand on the shoulders of those who came before us and made sure that we got the education that it would allow us to achieve. So you see, being nominated as the first Italian-American to be Vice President of the United States was a really big deal. I kind of think that if my maternal grandfather was alive, he probably would have said in his Neapolitan dialect, I had 28 grandchildren, and it had to be one of the girls who was nominated to be Vice President. In any event, I am very, very proud of this award. I'm delighted that we are raising money for young women to help them complete their education. And I want to thank all of you here who have contributed to help make that happen by contributing to the scholarship fund that NOIAW offers. And I do have a message as well for the young women receiving their grants today. Tell them that I hope that once they have completed their education, that they turn around and help another young girl behind them get hers. It doesn't have to be with money, though that's good. It could also be with mentoring, and I'd speak to the mentoring expert, Matilda Cuomo, about this. But I feel very strongly about how important education is to success in life, and this organization puts its money where its mouth is. When my mom died in 1990, I set up a scholarship at Marymount Manhattan College, and her name is called the Anthony Ferraro Scholarship Fund. I had 2 requirements. One was that it goes only to girls in financial need, and that those girls are children of mothers who are single heads of household. I figured my mother was helping the mother, and I was helping the daughter. Every year when I received notes from recipients of that scholarship, 2 or 3, depending on the economic strain on the endowment, I know my mother would be so happy. Today, as I receive this award, I know she is as well, because I owe my entire professional life to her, and including the '84 campaign. None of it would have happened without her hard work and with the education that she struggled to give me. So thank you all for having me here today, and thank you for listening.
Next on Italics, we'll go to a reading by poet John Giorno, where he presented his latest book, Subduing Demons in America, for the Calandra Institute's Writers Read series.
Hidden in the fog and mists were many witches, each a secret to herself. The witch Santa Myrte was a skeleton, with a grim reaper's sickle and a blood-curdling grin. She usually wore black, but occasionally liked feather boas and sequin gowns and big fake jewels and necklaces and rings on each bone finger. She chain smoked cigarettes and joints, drank whiskey straight, and snorted drugs. She had no flesh, but loved sex and bliss. She danced exquisitely the criminal tango. Santa Myrte answered the prayers of the poorest and most outcast. People in trouble adored her. Whores and drug dealers, car thieves, burglars, and con artists sought her protection. People prayed for the miracle of money for food and the lost and abandoned. Every single one who asked her help, she helped. Santa Merte was the wish-fulfilling witch. The witch of poetry is Saraswati, and her sister Lakshmi is the witch of wealth. When Saraswati wrote great poems and sang beautiful songs, filling the world with music and wisdom, and became famous and adored for her brilliance, beauty, and compassion, her sister Lakshmi got very jealous and did the most terrible things. She stole the cash and property, lied, invented false gossip, and had her excluded, and had the lawyers sue, blocking everything from happening. She punished her for her success. Sweet revenge. That's why poets never have money. Poets are poor sisters with great clarity and great bliss. Put your ear to stone and open your heart to the sky. Put your ear to stone and open your heart to the sky. Put your ear to stone and open your heart to the sky. Ugly and beautiful witches, peaceful and wrathful witches, increasing and magnanimous witches are the outer displays of wisdom. Witches of water, witches of earth, witches of fire, witches of air, witches of space are the inner wisdoms. And witches of fabulous sex in the union of great bliss are the secret wisdoms. And witches of great compassion and emptiness are the innermost secret wisdoms.
Well, that's it for this episode. Thanks for watching Italics. Please join us again in November as our Italian Heritage Month series on CUNY TV continues. On November 9th, we have an exclusive special presentation of the National Italian American Foundation's Convention and 34th Annual Gala Awards Dinner from Washington, D.C., indeed the largest and most influential gathering of Italian Americans anywhere in the nation. TV comedian Jimmy Kimmel MCs this year's star-studded black tie event, which honors Homeland Security Secretary Janet Napolitano, actress Carla Cugino, Chef Lydia Bastianich, and others. On November 16th, we'll premiere our new musical special program, Jukebox, which features Italian and Italian-American artists up close and personal. Italics correspondent Lucia Grillo hosts Jukebox. Again, thanks for watching. I'm Anthony Tamburri. See you next time. Arrivederci alla prossima puntata. Mamma, solo per te la mia canzone vola. Mamma, sarai con me, tu non sarai più sola. Quanto ti voglio bene, queste parole